Good morning, everyone. Today we'll deal about diseases of the uveal tract. I am Dr. Anushna. So first, before going to uveal tract, in this class, today we'll have details of anatomical classification of the uveal tract, macroanatomy, microanatomy of the uveal tract, and also the various functions of the uveal tract and the congenital anomalies in uveal tract. So as you can see, this is a figure of eyeball. Here you can see the white layer is the outermost fibrous coat of the eyeball. It is constituted by cornea and sclera. Cornea is the anterior 1/6 part and sclera is the posterior 5/6 part. Similarly, the middle vascular coat is the uvea and the inner sensory layer is the retina. So this pink one is uvea and the yellowish brown part is retina. So what is uvea? It is the middle vascular coat of the eyeball and the name is derived from uva, which means grape-like tissue. It is also known as tunica uvea or vascular tunic. The parts of the uvea are three from anterior to posterior. The anterior part is called the iris and the middle part is called the ciliary body and the posterior most part is called the choroid. This division is just anatomical, but structurally and functionally all these are indivisible. So again, this is a representation of the eyeball showing uvea. So anterior part is the iris. So this is iris and this purple color one is choroid and ciliary body and this is the choroid. So the posterior uvea is formed by choroid and the anterior uvea is formed by iris and ciliary body. So first we will describe about iris. So iris is the anterior most part of the uveal tract. The word iris is a Greek word called Iridos, which means messenger of the god. He is personified as rainbow. As iris is the only colored part of the eye, this word is derived from the word iridos and it was coined in 1525 in England. So iris is just similar to the circular diaphragm of a camera with a central aperture called pupil. So this is pupil. The circular aperture is called the pupil and this brown one is iris. So the average diameter of iris is 12 mm and thickness is about 0.5 mm. It is thickest at the collaret, that is the zigzag line is called the collaret and it is thickest here and it is thinnest at the iris root, that is at the insertion into the ciliary body. So because of the thinning at the iris root, in case of any blunt trauma, it gets teared away easily at the iris root. This is called iridodialysis. So because of the insertion of the iris into ciliary body, it divides the anterior segment. So what is meant by anterior segment? It is the structures along with the lens and the structures present in front of the lens. So that is cornea, anterior chamber, posterior chamber and lens and iris. So with the iris, you divide the anterior segment into structures which are present anterior to the iris are called anterior chamber. So this posterior surface of the cornea forms the anterior lining of the anterior chamber and the posterior part of the anterior chamber is lined by anterior surface of the iris. Next, coming to posterior chamber, it is lined anteriorly by the iris and posteriorly by the zonules and lens. So don't get confused between anterior segment and anterior chamber. All which is present anterior to the lens is called anterior segment and the part which is present anterior to the iris is called anterior chamber. Coming to macroscopic appearance, there are two surfaces, anterior and posterior. So the anterior surface is divided into two zones. One is ciliary zone and another one is pupillary zone. So how do we divide this iris into two zones? It is divided by a collarette. As I have already mentioned, collarette is a zigzag line which is about 2 mm from the pupil, and it is thickest part of the iris, and it represents the attachment of the pupillary membrane. It divides the iris into two zones, ciliary zone and pupillary zone. So ciliary zone is the, so here you can see ciliary zone, that is the peripheral zone, and it is characterized by presence of crypts, that is crypts, where the anterior limiting membrane is absent. So there are two rows of crypts. One is the peripheral crypts. Here you can see the peripheral crypts, and this is central crypts. And another characteristic feature of the ciliary zone is contraction furrows. These are just faint lines present concentric to the collarette, and they are clearly visible when the pupil is well dilated. And next comes the pupillary zone, that is extending from the collarette to the pupillary margin. It is characterized by the presence of pigment frill, pigment pupillary frill. It is formed due to the extension of the posterior pigment layer into the anterior epithelial layer. So this is also another representation of the iris. Here you can see this faint zone is the collarette. So it divides the whole iris into central pupillary zone and the peripheral ciliary zone. And here you can see crypts, where there is absence of the anterior limiting membrane. Next is the posterior surface. It is dark brown in color and contains Schwalbe's contraction folds and Schwalbe's structural furrows as well as circular furrows. Coming to the microscopic structure, the iris has 4 layers: anterior limiting layer, stroma, anterior epithelial layer, and posterior pigment epithelial layer. So first coming to anterior limiting layer, it is nothing but condensation of the superficial part of the stroma. It contains melanocytes and fibroblasts. Previously it was called endothelial layer, but it is a misnomer. And depending upon the amount of the melanocytes present, the iris colors vary. It varies from blue to dark brown. When it is blue, the iris has less pigment cells and it is thin layer. Whereas in brown iris, this anterior limiting layer is thick and contains more pigment. Coming to the iris stroma, it forms the main bulk of the iris and it consists of collagenous tissue along with various cells and muscles. So what are the muscles present in the iris stroma? That is sphincter pupillae as well as dilator pupillae. So sphincter pupillae is a 1 mm broad circular band in the pupillary region, and it is derived from the ectoderm, and it is supplied by parasympathetic nerve fibers of the third cranial nerve. So what is the function of sphincter pupillae? It aids in constriction of the pupil. So another muscle present in the iris is dilator pupillae. It lies in the posterior part of the ciliary zone. So what is ciliary zone? As I have already mentioned, it is the peripheral part of the iris. So it lies in the posterior part of the ciliary zone and it is supplied by cervical sympathetic nerves, and it helps in dilatation of the pupil. So sphincter pupillae is supplied by parasympathetic nerve fibers, whereas the dilator pupillae is supplied by sympathetic nerve fibers. Dilator pupillae aids in dilatation of the pupil. Sphincter pupillae aids in constriction of the pupil. The other bulk of the stroma is formed by vessels. They are arranged in radial pattern, which is responsible for the occurrence of radial streaks in the iris. And it also contains various cells like melanocytes, lymphocytes, fibroblasts, and macrophages. Coming to the anterior epithelial layer, it is just the continuation of the pigment epithelium of the retina and ciliary body, and it lacks melanocytes. And there are basal processes in the anterior epithelial layer from which dilator pupillae muscle arises. Next, coming to posterior pigment epithelial layer. It is anterior continuation of the non-pigmented epithelium of the ciliary body, and it is derived from the internal layer of the optic cup, and it forms the pigmentary frill in the pupil. So this is diagrammatical representation of the microscopic structure of the iris. So as I have already mentioned, the anterior layer is formed by anterior limiting layer. That is just only condensation of the stroma of the iris. So this is anterior limiting layer, and here you can see a depression where the anterior limiting layer is absent. So this depression where the anterior limiting layer is absent is called crypt. And next, the most bulk of the iris is formed by stroma. In it, what all are present? Cells, vessels, as well as nerves and muscles. So what cells are present? Macrophages, fibroblasts, and pigment cells. What vessels are present? Both arteries and veins. And muscles are sphincter pupillae and dilator pupillae. So sphincter pupillae is just 1 mm circular band present in the pupillary zone. Here you can see striations present in the pupillary zone, that is sphincter pupillae, and this long red line is the brown line is the dilator pupillae. You can see extending in the posterior part, and that too in the ciliary zone. So this is dilator pupillae. Next layer is the anterior epithelial layer. So it is a forward continuation of the pigment epithelium of the retina. And next is posterior epithelial layer, which is pigmented, and it is continuation of the non-pigmented epithelium of the retina as well as ciliary body. So here you can again see that sphincter pupillae is just a circular band surrounding the pupil about 1 mm in diameter, and it is present in the pupillary zone, whereas dilator pupillae extends in the ciliary zone. So what are the functions of iris? It controls the amount of light entering the eye through the pupil. So in bright light, what happens to the pupil? It gets constricted so that it cuts off the extra light which is reaching the retina. Whereas in dim light, the pupil gets dilated so that more amount of light will reach the retina. It also defines the eye color and controls the depth of the field. It also aids as a source of blood ocular tissues. So next structure is the ciliary body. So we have already dealt with the most anterior part of the uvea, that is iris. So next anterior part of the uvea is formed by iris and ciliary body. So iris is completed. Next we'll deal with ciliary body. So what is ciliary body? It is just a forward continuation of the choroid at the ora serrata. Macroscopically, when we have a cut section, it is triangular in appearance, where the outer side is formed by the ciliary muscle, which lies against the sclera, and the base is formed by the posterior chamber and the posterior aspect of the iris. So what is posterior chamber? It is the structures which lie between the iris and the space between the posterior part of the iris and the lens is called the posterior chamber. So the base is formed by posterior chamber and the posterior aspect of the iris. Inner side. The inner side is divided into two parts, anterior part and the posterior part. Anterior part, it shows finger-like projections, that is called pars plicata. Plica meaning finger-like projections, or it is also known as corona ciliaris. And the posterior part is smooth, so it is called pars plana, means flat. Orbicularis ciliaris is also another name for pars plana. So here you can see ciliary body extending from here to here. When we have a cut section here, it represents the triangle. So the outer side is formed by the ciliary muscle and sclera, and the base is formed by posterior chamber. So that is iris and the lens. So this part is the posterior chamber, and posterior aspect of the iris form the base. Coming to the inner side. So inner side is divided into two parts. Anterior part is the pars plicata. Here you can see finger-like projections. Those are called ciliary processes, and that is pars plicata. And the posterior smooth part is called pars plana. And what is the width of the ciliary body? It differs nasally and temporally. Temporally, it is more wide, that is 7 mm, and nasally, it is about 5 mm in width. Pars plicata is 2 to 2.5 mm both nasally as well as temporally, whereas in pars plana the width varies temporally. It is about 5 mm temporally and 3 mm nasally. So for any to approach into the vitreous, we use temporal approach so that pars plana is wide and there is less amount of damage to the zonules. So next, coming to ciliary process. As I have already mentioned, these are finger-like projections arising from the pars plicata part of the ciliary body. They are about 70 to 80 in number and it is 2 mm in length and 0.5 mm width with a height of 0.8 to 1 mm. Here you can see the ciliary process. The main central core is formed by arteries as well as veins and it is surrounded by epithelium. Coming to the microscopic structure of the ciliary body. It has supraciliary lamina. So that is the condensation of the stroma and it lies against the sclera. Next is stroma and the epithelial layers. So epithelial layers are external limiting membrane, pigment epithelium, non-pigmented epithelium and inner basement membrane. So coming to the supraciliary lamina, it is outermost part and is the condensed part of the stroma and it contains pigmented collagen fibers and it continues posteriorly as the suprachoroidal lamina and anteriorly it continues with the anterior limiting membrane. Next, coming to stroma. So this is important because it contains ciliary muscle which is a non-striated muscle and it is triangular in cut section. It has 3 types of fibers: longitudinal fibers, circular fibers and radial fibers. So longitudinal fibers, they take origin from the scleral spur and get inserted into the suprachoroidal lamina. Circular fibers, they are the innermost part and they are nearest to the lens. Radial fibers, these are obliquely placed. So the main action of the ciliary muscle is to slacken the suspensory ligament which helps in accommodation. And the circular fibers, they act as a sphincter. It is supplied by parasympathetic nerve fibers from the ciliary ganglion of the third nerve. And the stroma also contain vessels. It is formed by anastomosis of both long and short posterior ciliary arteries and this major arterial circle supplies the both iris and ciliary body. Next, coming to the epithelial layers. It has pigment epithelial layer, non-pigment epithelial layer and internal limiting membrane. So pigment epithelium layer is continuation of the RPE and anteriorly it continues as pigment epithelium of the iris. And next, non-pigmented epithelium, this is a forward continuation of the sensory retina. It continues anteriorly with the pigment epithelium of the iris. Internal limiting membrane, it is the forward continuation of the internal limiting membrane of the retina. So what is the main function of the ciliary body? It has ciliary muscle, so it helps in accommodation, and the ciliary processes, they help in the secretion of the aqueous humor, so it maintains IOP and controls the blood aqueous barrier. So what is accommodation? It is the ability to see near vision by altering the size and shape of the lens. So what happens in accommodated eye and what is present in relaxed eye? So here you can see this is a relaxed eye. When the ciliary muscles are relaxed, the fibers are taut. So the lens is at minimum stretch, at maximum stretch, and it has minimum power. And when it is accommodated, the ciliary muscle contracts. So the suspensory ligaments are slackened or relaxed. So this leads to circular shape of the lens. So because of the circular shape of the lens, the accommodative power of the lens increases and it is able to see the near objects clearly. So here this is a ray diagram representing the accommodation. Here we can see when it is in a non-accommodative or relaxed state, the distant light vision, the light rays coming from the distant object, they get focused on the retina. And here in accommodated state, the light rays coming from the near objects also get diverged and require more refraction for focusing. So they get focused on the retina. Coming to choroid. So this is the posterior most part of the uvea. It is highly vascular and it is dark brown in tissue, and it constitutes the posterior 5/6 part of the eye. It extends from the optic disc, that means the optic nerve head, to the ora serrata, that is the peripheral part of the retina. And it is thick anteriorly, about 100 microns, and posteriorly it is more thick, that is 220 microns. It is just homologous to the pia arachnoid of the brain, which vascularizes the brain. Coming to the microscopic structure, it consists of 3 layers: suprachoroidal lamina, stroma of the choroid, and Bruch's membrane. So suprachoroidal lamina, it is about 10 to 34 microns thick and contains the collagen fibers, melanocytes, and fibroblasts. It is adjacent to the suprachoroidal space, that is space between the choroid and the sclera. So it contains all the vessels and nerves, that is long posterior ciliary arteries, veins, and long and short ciliary nerves. Next, coming to stroma. So this is, as in other tissues like iris and ciliary body, here also it contains vessels and cells as well as nerves. So what are the various cells present in the choroid? Macrophages, mast cells, fibroblasts, plasma cells, and melanocytes. And the main bulk of the stroma is formed by vessels. They are arranged in 3 layers. The outermost part is larger vessels, that is called Haller's layer. And the inner layer is by medium vessels, that is called the Sattler's layer. And the innermost layer is the choriocapillaries. Choriocapillary is a rich capillary network, and it nourishes the pigment epithelium as well as the outer 4 layers of the sensory retina. These capillaries are fenestrated. Next, coming to Bruch's membrane. It is a thin non-cellular layer and it is about 2 to 4 microns thick, and it consists of 5 layers on electron microscopy, that is inner basal lamina and outer basal lamina. And in between it has inner collagenous zone, outer collagenous zone, and with an elastic zone in the middle. So here you can see the RPE basement membrane, inner collagenous layer, elastic layer, outer collagenous layer, and again there will be a basement membrane here. So these are choriocapillaries and medium-sized vessels. So what are the functions of choroid? The main function of the choroid is, it is a vascular structure. So the main function of choroid will be to supply nourishment to layers of the retina. So outer 4 layers of the retina derive blood supply from the choroid, and it regulates retinal heat, and because of the excess pigment present in the choroid, it absorbs the excess light so that total internal reflection will not occur, and it also assists in the control of intraocular pressure. Coming to blood supply of the uveal tract. The main supply of the uveal tract is by 3 major vessels, that is short posterior ciliary artery, long posterior ciliary artery, and anterior ciliary artery. So short posterior ciliary arteries, these are branches of the ophthalmic artery. They arise in 2 arteries, and they divide into 10 to 20 branches which pierce the sclera around the optic nerve and supply the choroid in a segmental manner. So here you can see these are short posterior ciliary artery arising from the ophthalmic artery, and they divide into multiple branches here, and they are piercing the sclera around the optic nerve. So this yellow one is the optic nerve, and it pierces the sclera around the optic nerve and supplies the choroid. Next, coming to long posterior ciliary artery. This is also a branch of ophthalmic artery, and there are 2 branches of ophthalmic artery. One is nasal long posterior ciliary artery and one is temporal posterior ciliary artery. So they pierce the sclera and pass in the suprachoroidal space as already mentioned, and after reaching the ciliary body, they anastomose with the anterior ciliary artery to form the major arterial circle, that is circular arteriosus major. So here you can see the long posterior ciliary artery, they pierce the sclera, run forward in the suprachoroidal space, anastomose with each other and also with the anterior ciliary arteries to form the major arterial circle, and then they give multiple branches to supply the ciliary body. So here you can see this is ophthalmic artery. So you can see two posterior ciliary artery, long posterior ciliary artery. This is nasal and this is temporal. So without giving any branch, it passes along the suprachoroidal space, and after reaching the ciliary body, here it anastomoses with the anterior ciliary arteries as well as the long posterior ciliary artery from the other side, and this is called the circular arteriosus major. After forming this circular arteriosus major, from this again multiple branches arise and supply the ciliary body. This is also another diagrammatic representation of the long posterior ciliary artery. So one arises nasally and one arises temporally here. Along the suprachoroidal space, they pass without giving any branches. And this is the ciliary body. Here, they unite with the anterior ciliary artery. And here it forms a major arterial circle and multiple branches arise here. So this is also similar diagram showing the major arterial circle formed here in the ciliary body from the anterior ciliary arteries. So what are these anterior ciliary arteries? The anterior ciliary arteries arise from the muscular arteries. So what are the four rectus muscle present in the eyeball? Superior rectus, inferior rectus, medial rectus and lateral rectus. So there are two anterior ciliary arteries arising from each recti muscle artery. So there will be two arising from the superior rectus, two arising from the medial rectus and two arising from the inferior rectus. But there is only one artery arising from the lateral rectus. So there are totally 7 anterior ciliary arteries, and these, as already mentioned, the anastomose with the long posterior ciliary artery in the ciliary body to form circular arteriosus major. So here you can see they are arising from the muscle and forms a major arterial circle in the ciliary body. Here also the same. This is another diagrammatic representation. Here you can see the long posterior ciliary artery and these are anterior ciliary arteries, and this is the anastomosis, major arterial trunk. After forming the major trunk, these give again radial branches. So these radial vessels are responsible for the occurrence of radial streaks in the ciliary zone. Coming to the venous drainage. The iris veins as well as those of the ciliary veins, they anastomose at the ciliary body. They join with the veins of the ciliary process and then they drain into the choroidal veins, which again drain into the vortex veins. So there are 4 vortex veins: superotemporal, supronasal and infratemporal, infranasal. The superotemporal and supronasal veins, they join into the superior ophthalmic vein. The infratemporal and infranasal, they join into the inferior ophthalmic vein. Again, these both ophthalmic veins, they drain into the cavernous sinus. So here you can see these are the superotemporal and supronasal vortex veins. They are present near the equator. This is the infratemporal and infranasal vortex veins. They drain into the inferior ophthalmic artery and inferior ophthalmic vein, and superior ophthalmic vein. These both veins, they drain into the cavernous sinus. So that completes the venous drainage. Coming to the nerve supply. So iris is supplied by long and short ciliary nerve. The sphincter pupil and dilator pupil nerve supply I have already mentioned. Coming to the ciliary body, it is supplied by sensory supply is derived from the nasociliary nerve. Parasympathetic is by short ciliary nerve, which is a branch of third cranial nerve. And the sympathetic supply is from cervical sympathetic plexus through the long ciliary nerve. Coming to choroid, the parasympathetic supply is via the facial nerve and pterygopalatine ganglion, as well as the third cranial nerve via the short ciliary nerve. Coming to development of uvea. This is an important PG bit for you. So what are the derivatives from the neuroectoderm and what are the derivatives from the mesoderm is important. Generally they give sphincter pupillae and dilator pupillae is derived from which part is the question regularly, and we generally confuse that muscles they arise from the mesoderm. But here it is important to remember that sphincter pupillae and dilator pupillae they are derived from the neuroectoderm, as well as epithelial layers of the ciliary body and iris are also derived from the neuroectoderm. And the remaining structures, that is the blood vessels of the choroid, iris, ciliary vessels, stroma of the iris, ciliary muscle, and melanocytes. All these are derived from the paraaxial mesoderm. Melanocytes are developed from the neural crest. Next, coming to congenital anomalies. So the various congenital anomalies are heterochromia of the iris. So what you can see in this picture. So one color in one eye, the iris is blue in color. In the other, it is brown in color. So this is called heterochromia iridium. That is, color of one iris differs from the color of the other iris. What is this known as heterochromia iridis? Here you see one sector of the iris is different in color from the remaining part of the iris. So this is called heterochromia iridis. This is called as heterochromia iridum. So it can be either a congenital anomaly or due to acquired conditions. So what are the various acquired conditions leading to heterochromia? It can be Fuchs heterochromic iridocyclitis or presence of any iris nevus or malignant melanoma of the iris. And also deposition of the melanin, that is malignant melanoma. All these conditions can lead to heterochromia. And another condition is Horner's syndrome. And what is the picture shown here? So this represents chorectopia, that is abnormally eccentric pupil. Here you can see the pupil is displaced peripherally. What is the normal location of the pupil? It is central and somewhat nasally. Here you can see the pupil is pulled to one side. This is called chorectopia, abnormally eccentric pupil. What can you see in this picture? You can see two pupils. So this is called polychoria. And another abnormality is aniridia. Aniridia means there is absence of the iris tissue. That is called true aniridia. That is, there is complete absence of the iris tissue, but it is very rare. Generally, we see clinical aniridia where iris is represented as a small remnant peripherally. Here you can see complete iris is absent, but only a small rim of the iris tissue is present peripherally. So through this peripheral rim of the iris, we can see the zonules and the lens clearly. Next, coming to persistent pupillary membrane. So this picture is persistent pupillary membrane. Here you see shreds of pigmented layer extending from the pupillary zone, from the collaret. They extend from the collaret and they either extend into the anterior chamber and float freely in the anterior chamber, or they can be attached to the lens. And it represents the persistent remnants of the anterior vascular sheath of the lens. Coming to coloboma. So what does coloboma mean? It is defect in the tissue. It is caused due to incomplete closure of the embryonic fissure at the time of development. So it is associated with various anomalies like microphthalmos, cataract, glaucoma, refractive error, and other colobomas of the lids, lens, and retina. And it is also associated with Church syndrome, that is coronal atresia, retarded growth, heart defects, and genital anomalies. It is caused due to mutation in the PAX2 gene. There are various types of colobomas that can be complete or incomplete. Complete means in the whole embryonic fissure there is defect. So the coloboma is present extending from the iris to the optic nerve head. Whereas in incomplete, only a part of the embryonic fissure there is defect. So it can be manifested either as an iris coloboma or choroidal coloboma or only optic nerve head coloboma. So what is typical coloboma and what is atypical coloboma? Typical coloboma means it is present in the infronasal quadrant. So the pupil is pear-shaped. When it is present in the choroid, the choroidal coloboma has an oval rounded apex, and the apex is directed towards the disc, and the vessels are seen traversing the disc. Sometimes the disc can also be involved. Atypical means it can involve any other part of the iris, not the infronasal quadrant. It can be present in any other part of the iris. It is called as atypical coloboma. So the etiology for coloboma is intrauterine inflammations and persistence of the fibrovascular sheath. So this is a typical coloboma of the iris. Here you can see defect in the infronasal quadrant of the iris. And this picture is choroidal coloboma. Here you can see an oval whitish lesion present inferior to the optic nerve head. So this is the optic nerve head. As I already mentioned, typical means it is present in the infronasal quadrant. So this is an example of typical choroidal coloboma present in the inferior nasal part of the choroid. You can see here two colobomas are present adjacent to each other. This is also an example of choroidal coloboma. Here you can see small coloboma present beneath the optic disc, and this is a large coloboma. Even the optic disc is also involved. So with this we complete the congenital anomalies of the choroid. So we have discussed about the anatomy of the uvea. So what are the various structures present in the uveal tissue? About iris, microscopic anatomy as well as macroscopic appearance, ciliary body anatomy microscopically and macroscopically, choroid, its blood supply, nerve supply, development, and also the congenital anomalies. So if you have any doubts, you can ask me. So you are free to ask any questions if you have. I hope all have understood the topic. In the next class, we'll discuss about anterior iridocyclitis or anterior uveitis. So if you have any doubts, feel free to ask. Hope everyone is. So if you don't have any doubts to ask, I will ask you some questions. How patient approaches in polychoria? So if the patient has multiple pupils, so what will be the main complaint the patient has? He has glare, because more amount of light will be approaching the retina. So the patient will have glare and photophobia. When he goes out in the sunlight, he will experience more light entering the retina. So he is not comfortable in bright light. That will be the main complaint with the patients in polychoria. If the second pupil is present in the superior part where the lid is covering the second pupil, then the patient will not have any complaint. So are you clear with that, Deepti? Okay. So any more doubts? That's it. Shall I end the session? Or anyone else is ready with any doubt? So I hope you all are clear with the anatomy of the uveal tract. So in the next class, I will discuss about anterior uveitis. Before starting the next session in the next class, there will be a brief review of this today's class. So be prepared with the class. I'll ask you few questions. Some random number I'll pick and I'll ask you the questions in the chat. So be prepared with the topic. Okay. Thank you.